As the wait for the Winds of Winter stretches further on, it becomes particularly brutal for Jon Snow, given where his story ended in the most recent A Song of Ice and Fire book. A Dance with Dragons left much to speculate upon, from Jon Snow's death and potential resurrection to what happens next with Daenerys Targaryen. Not all of them were answered even by Game of Thrones' ending, either, thanks to so many divergences, and the omission of characters like young Griff and Lady Stoneheart. Few might have predicted, though, that the biggest topic of conversation so many years later would be the Winds of Winter taking so long to release. The gaps had grown between the other books, but George R.R. Martin himself was long confident that Game of Thrones, which started the same year A Dance with Dragons released, wouldn't overtake him. Until, unfortunately, it did. Martin's delays and struggles with the Winds of Winter are understandable, from his busy schedule to the expansive nature of the plot, but that's meant bad news for poor Jon Snow. Jon Snow could be dead longer than he's even been alive. Jon has been dead a long time already. Jon Snow lies dead in Game of Thrones. By the time of Jon Snow's death in A Dance with Dragons, he's around 16 years old, having been 14 when the series started. Game of Thrones aged the characters up by a few years. That's quite stark when put next to how long the Winds of Winter is taking. It's been almost 14 years, and with the book still sans release date, we could actually get to a point where Jon has been dead in the real world longer than he's even been alive in universe. For some added perspective, the first 5 Asoyaf books were released in just under 15 years. It's a fact that highlights how particularly harsh the wait has been for A Song of Ice and Fire's co-main character. By the time the saga ends, it will probably span more than his and many others' entire lives. Jon's story isn't just waiting to continue, he's dying. Other characters are at least well poised for more adventures. It's easy to imagine life going on for them, but Jon's story currently ends with death, and it'll be a long wait for him to be resurrected. Okay, maybe Daenerys' never-ending diarrhea is just as bad. This really throws into contrast Jon Snow's death and resurrection in Game of Thrones. Obviously, it was never going to have the same passage of time in the real world, and that's not a bad thing, but in universe he was dead for a couple of days, and it never really felt like it did enough with the story, instead simply rushing back to the status quo. In the book, that should be much longer. Not 14 to 16 years long, of course, but it's easy to imagine Martin having Jon be dead for at least a week, if not several. That, combined with the real-life wait for the next book, can make it a much more satisfying experience when it does eventually happen. How will Jon Snow be resurrected in the Winds of Winter? It should be different to Game of Thrones. Jon Snow is resurrected in Game of Thrones. Jon Snow's resurrection is the subject of many The Winds of Winter theories, not least because there's been almost 14 years and counting to think about it. Like in Game of Thrones, it will probably involve Melisandre in some way, since she's still at the Wall in the books, but it's fair to assume it won't be as straightforward as it was on TV. For starters, Jon will likely be living as Ghost when the Winds of Winter begins, with hints that his consciousness entered the body of his direwolf at the end of A Dance with Dragons. That would be a smart ploy, as it's a means of keeping Jon in the story somewhat, seeing things through the eyes and mind of the animal and how that affects him, before he can be brought back. For the resurrection itself, it should be something either more complex in terms of the magic involved, or something much darker. One big possibility is a sacrifice, with Melisandre killing someone in order to resurrect Jon. Possible options include Gilly's baby or Shireen Baratheon. Alternatively, it could be magic involving Bran Stark, the Three-Eyed Crow, and the Weirwood Trees. There are a lot of options heading into the Winds of Winter, and the greater complexity combined with the vastly increased passage of time can make it a much better story all round. Now we just need the book to release.